All right. All right, we are live. Welcome to another episode of Social Business Hour. I'm a co-host, Brian Fanzo, better known as iSocialFans on Twitter, joined every single Monday for almost 2 years by my co-host, Rachel Miller. How are you today, Rachel?
Hey, everyone. I am great. Happy Monday.
Yes, happy Monday indeed. And so we had an awesome show last week. It was just the two of us. We talked about influencer marketing and really just kind of set the stage for this entire month about influencer marketing. So those of you that are tuning in, we use the hashtag SBizHour on the Twitters. As always, you can add your comments and questions. Our community manager, Kristen Cardos, will be dropping the questions and the comments and conversation in both Twitter and in the comments section. So I'm excited to have our guest today, Amy Tennyson from IBM Social Business, who I've been working with for a long time. Amy, welcome to Social Business Hour.
Thank you. It's so great to join you guys.
So it's nice you get a nice work from home on Mondays. So I know you have a special surprise coming in December. But if you could let people know kind of your background, what you do, and then we're going to go and get into some of the questions. But I would love for you to kind of talk about what your role is at IBM and a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. So I lead influencer marketing at IBM for the IBM Commerce, Social, and Mobile divisions. And really, I think what we'll talk about today is, what exactly is influencer marketing. But specifically for us, it's focusing on social influencers with particular topic area expertise. I've been doing this a little bit really since I joined IBM. Almost a year and a half ago. And before that, I actually spent 7 years at Dell and helped put together our Dell University program where we trained employees on how to put together influencer marketing programs. So it's kind of been a real natural transition working at IBM to just kind of further go out and actually start to implement some of these programs myself.
I love it. So we talked a little bit about influencer marketing last week, and a friend of yours, who was a friend of the show as well, Brian Kramer, actually jumped on video and hijacked about 3/4 of the discussions. We ended up having him as like kind of impromptu guest last week, and we had a lot of really good discussion just really around influencer marketing, the idea of an expert, what it means to have actual influence, and what it means for a brand, and kind of that perspective. And I know he does a lot of work with Pure Matter, does a lot of work with IBM, and of course Rachel works for with Pure Matter as well. So there's lots of connections and synergy here. So I'm excited to kind of have this conversation. So from your perspective on what you're doing at IBM, and really we'll get into question one. What is influencer marketing to you guys, and really how do you kind of treat influencer marketing as a whole?
Yeah, I mean, I think the very first thing that I often have to set expectations within my own company is, what exactly is an influencer? Because, oftentimes you can have thought leaders who are influencers, but not necessarily on Twitter or social media. So, there's that distinction between an influencer in general versus one who uses social media as a platform. And then certainly you also have employee influencers and client influencers, and all four of those groups are very important, but particular for our program, we're focused on the social influencer piece of it. And with that, it's really all about empowering these, external trusted influencers who leverage social as their primary platform, but to, be able to empower them to help tell the IBM story on our behalf. That's really ultimately the value that IBM is getting out of it. In addition, for us having kind of a natural and organic way to participate in some of these thought leadership conversations where it's not always about us. Instead, we found this great group of influencers, around topics like commerce, social business, employee culture and HR, and we're working with those folks to be able to, promote the third-party stuff that they have that's not about a particular brand, but it's just, great thought leadership. And so we want to help amplify that across the market.
I love it. So, Rachel, you want to we had a really interesting discussion last week on really influencer marketing and value to brand. I know a lot of it was talking about, making sure it was rewarding for both. What are your, Rachel, I think it's really interesting to see here kind of IBM's approach.
Yeah, actually, I kind of want to loop back to what Amy said at the very beginning of her answer with what is an influencer? I know you mentioned there's someone who is a true industry expert, but they're not huge on Twitter. So how do you work them into your programs? Because they're still genuinely influential, and even if it's on, Tumblr or their own blog. How do you factor that in, and how do you sell that when you're building out your new campaigns?
Yeah, no, that's such a great question. I think when it comes to activities that you're doing virtually, oftentimes you're just going after the people with a larger social media presence. But what we find is that sometimes people with the biggest social amplification presence aren't necessarily the people who are the best at content creation. So that, by itself is one level of distinction where you might have really great bloggers who don't have a lot of Twitter followers, but both are equally valuable. So we look at, if we're doing a tweet chat, maybe we want to pull in someone with a bigger Twitter following because that's the platform that we're using for that conversation. But as we're talking about, all this different stuff, or looking at people who might come to an event, oftentimes there's people who are really great content creators, whether it's a personal blog, a professional blog, or even that, they do a lot of video blogs or videos on YouTube. Those people are so valuable too. So we try to make sure that we have that good mix of types of people with different levels of presences involved. And then certainly you have people who aren't, necessarily on social media at all, but they still have a good point of view. And so for us, more of that is where we incorporate them in in-person events. So, as we have something like an IBM Insight, IBM Amplify, we're going to do specific events just for our social influencers. But we do try to pull in some of those other people, whether it's a client influencer or customer, or even an employee influencer to participate. So we might have video content that we promote as part of our kind of social content plan following the event that they're included in. We might have other influencers help promote the content that person's in. It's just that, they're not necessarily who we use for social amplification, but the content is still there.
Yeah, I think that's one of my favorite things so far with working with various IBM teams, that you truly get that a successful influencer campaign has many different personas, and they're all very effective when working in unison. And I think that's also when you have, your industry experts, you have your subject matter experts who are not always the same thing. And that's one thing a company like IBM or any large enterprise company can back to them, is that amplification and kind of offering, okay, well, you only have 500 people on Twitter, but we're going to share your content on your behalf. And boom, now you have like 1,500. I think that's part of that whole mutually beneficial relationship aspect.
Yeah, I would just add, we've seen that some of our best influencers are actually more of that up and coming audience, right? They're not necessarily people with 30, 40, 50, 100,000 Twitter followers, but they're people who are incredibly passionate about what they write and talk about, and they want to get out there in a bigger way. And so they see working with our program as a way to talk about things they already care about, but then have this entire engine of IBM, both our branded handles as well as our 1,000 employee advocates that we push the influencer content out to, as kind of this engine that can help support them.
So I know a lot of people in our community, like, they get that influencer marketing is kind of like that, the best word of mouth ever. But what's the first step? So when you're starting out a new campaign, what do you first do, and what can you share with our community that's going to, help them get on the right path?
Yeah, of course. I'll tell you, everyone likes to jump into influencer identification first. They just want to start picking the people out because, that's some of the fun of it. But it just goes back to strategy. And, you talk about strategy and I think people are like, oh, what exactly does that mean? But I think it's very specific. You have to figure out, one, just what is it that you actually want from the influencers? Do you want them to guest blog? Do you want them to participate in events? Do you want them to, help with social amplification? But you need to be very specific about what it is you're helping to accomplish, by engaging them. And then two, figure out what's the value that they're going to get in exchange for doing that. And there's tons of different types of values, whether that's access to content, access to subject matter experts, to events, it's through relationships, there could even be some paid opportunities from time to time, but you really have to identify, like, what is it that you want from them and what are you willing to give them in return? That's that fair exchange of value for their participation.
Do you find that it's often different with each individual influencer? Like you really have to find out what makes them tick individually to make it work? You can't just say, well, you get to go to this event. And they're like, well, I don't travel. And you're like, damn it.
Yeah. No, I think that's huge. I mean, ultimately, it just goes back to the fact that as you look at influencer marketing, it's not this one size fits all approach, but every single person you work with is going to be a unique case. And so you really have to start with the relationship. I mean, you have to know them. You have to understand what motivates them, and then go from there and figure out like what specific need did they have that you can help meet. But I think like even on that larger scale, if you can identify what it is you want them to do and what it is that you have to offer, then as you're identifying influencers, that's kind of where that matching process starts to work, right? So you can know, who do you have relationships with? Who do you want to build a relationship with? And then what specifically would you have those types of people do? So that as you do finally get to that outreach step, it's a very personalized, crafted message and type of engagement opportunity. You wouldn't necessarily send two people the same thing, or even if you sent them, both an invite to an event, I think the expectation of what you would get out of both of those two people is different, and you've just got to be flexible enough to let them really figure out what's going to work best for them. And of course, I mean, I can't undersell enough like the importance of making sure that when you communicate a value that you're going to deliver to them, that you do in fact live up to that. I think so often you talk about, I'll get you access or, introduce you to these people. And then sometimes that stuff never happens. And so, you want to make sure you're building a custom program for each person, but then that you are kind of living up to your half of the relationship.
So some of the questions we have coming in, and we both have on here and on Twitter. Some Amy Greer, Ali Greer, not Amy, Ali Greer, formerly of Scoop It and a good friend of mine. She actually wrote a really good question, really on under like really the nitty gritty side. So what are some best ways to ensure that parties are following through with their agreement once influencers are identified and planning has begun? So what's some of your like kind of secrets or things kind of not only continuing the conversation, but making sure, like you said, that actually both parties are coming through with their side of the agreement?
Yeah. I mean, I think for me, I'm blessed to have, other people on my team that help support me, as well as we work very closely with the Pure Matter team, because there's a lot of kind of checks and balances in place, right? It's not just me having to keep up with every single thing that we do. So, we try just logistically, we try to communicate, as we can via email. We try to also make sure that we are very active in a private Facebook group that we manage to communicate to influencers. And we make sure too that before we even outreach to people that we kind of have essentially rules of the road established. We just recently went through and created kind of a one-pager essentially on the program, as well as a welcome kit, so that you can set those expectations up front on exactly what it is that you're delivering on, and kind of what that fair exchange of value is that you're hoping to put in place. And then outside of that, it's an arduous process. There are, event spreadsheets that we use and other things like that aren't highly technical, but it's just making sure that, for example, if you take someone's time to do a video interview with them, you do have to, in fact, publish a video of their interview and then make sure that they have that link to it, as opposed to kind of, committing their time to do something and then never following through in the end.
No, and I think IBM also does a really great job. The full disclosure side is I've been an influencer on the IBM programs for a while. I think IBM does a really great job of also amplifying that with the employee advocacy and kind of taking it to another notch. I think some influencer programs, hey, I'm going to do a video of you. It's going to go out to all of our partners and sit on our private interweb, but really it doesn't amplify or bring any attention. And oftentimes you don't even get a copy of it. So there's a couple programs that I've seen come through where great video, great content, it sits for their paid employees, but no one externally ever knows. So that give is really like, well, that's great. I gave you all that content. you let me have a video. So I love that that the kind of methodology there with IBM. Another question that Robin Wright brought up that I thought was really good. You mentioned discovering those up and comers, and I think that's extremely important. I don't think follower count anymore dictates someone's influence or passion, but Twitter is great for search. But she was actually asking any tricks or any things or tools that you use to discover those type of influencers outside of just Twitter search that you might leverage, or even maybe that Pyramider might leverage. Do you reach out to partners? Do you use other live events in the industry? What are some other things you use to kind of discover the new and up-and-comers?
So we use a variety of tools, Nimble, Tracker, Hootsuite. I mean, a lot of those are probably a little bit more Twitter focused just because of naturally where the biggest amount of data exists. But I think we're also starting to use some of our own internal tools like IBM Watson. Kind of interesting enough, we are going to be releasing this fall emerging social star lists, right, for each of our different topic areas. So they're not necessarily people who've opted into our program, but they're people who we've leveraged Watson Analytics to watch for a period of several months and identify who's really kind of seeing great upward momentum when it comes to influence around these particular topic areas. Outside of that, I'll tell you, we do just a ton of internal outreach, right? So it's not just about who the tools identify, but it's also who do our content marketers, read on a regular basis when it comes to blog posts. We work with PR to identify if PR is seeing any people that maybe we don't necessarily see on a regular basis, and certainly get feedback from other, varieties of internal subject matter experts. Ironically enough, we even had an event that we sent a couple of our influencers to a couple of weeks ago, and they met another influencer at the event who asked to join our program. So it's just neat to see that it's such an organic growing process. I don't think you have one list and that's the only list you use. I think it continues to evolve over time. And then even the people in your program kind of go from active to inactive and then active again. So you just want to make sure that you're constantly curating that, based on all the different data points that you have, and certainly not just Twitter.
So I know that we talked about following through. All parties involved need to do what they say they're going to do. But what role does transparency play in influencer marketing? Like, how do you coach your influencers to share that they're working with you, and how much do you script what they say publicly?
Yeah, I think transparency is so important, and not just from the perspective of how you work with that influencer and put messages out into the marketplace, but also just the transparency between you and the influencer on any particular activity you're working directly with them on. I think from the perspective of going out to the market with a message, whether it's a co-created message or whether it's a third-party message that an influencer is putting out, we absolutely do not believe in scripting any messages, right? So anytime that an influencer is talking on behalf of IBM, or not even on behalf of IBM, but talking in something that is endorsed by IBM, 100% of the time, that content is something that they've written themselves. We'll give them access to content and links. So if we have a product launch, we'll say, hey, let's do a briefing with you. Let's give you all this information. Here's other like online references or URLs that might be valuable to you. But we really ultimately leave it up to the influencer to deem what's valuable to their own particular network, and what's the context that they as an influencer can really provide around that. I think too, just with things around FTC guidelines, it's more and more important than ever that we're very transparent, especially when influencers are paid. I think we're starting to see a need to, even if an influencer comes to an event where they're not paid for their time, but they got a free conference badge, I do think we're at a stage where that type of stuff should probably be in some way communicated out there, because there's some exchange of value that they're still getting for being there. So I don't think we have all the answers. I think our goal is just that we're going to provide opportunities that are free of charge to our influencers, but anything that they ever say or write about us is always going to be 100%, what they want to say from them, and not in any way scripted by IBM.
Yeah, and I see some comments coming on Twitter, and people, kind of either not surprised or glad to see that you're saying it's not scripted. And I can tell you, working with IBM and working with other brands, there are plenty of brands that give you a scripted, not only a scripted role of what you should be posting, but really what their target is and what they want you to tweet or what they want you to post or how they want you to blog. And I think that actually is the limiting aspect, which is, I think, might surprise a lot of people, is that actually then you really just do that in the bare minimum. And I think one of the things that has allowed me to always amplify IBM content and IBM stuff is, you're kind of known or kind of doing a great job of going above and beyond when it comes to product access, people access, the experience that an influencer gets. When it's so great that you have no better thing to do than to tell everybody about it, including all of your friends. And I think that's a rare occurrence. So I think with question number 4, I'm really interested because I think it's changing. I think some brands are doing things differently, which then puts a little bit more onus on how IBM does things and how you do things. But I'm curious, what do influencers want when you're working with new up-and-coming influencers as well as these, I'd say, older school influencers that have been around the block? What exactly are they looking for in their get perspective, and how do you kind of align that with your get from IBM?
Yeah, of course. And I think it just it varies based on the person and based on what they're working on in their own particular lives, right? Certainly there's a group of influencers out there who have built up enough of a social presence that everything they do is pay for play. And so if you want to work with them, that's just something you're going to have to do. We really look at that next group down, right? So not necessarily the pay for play audience, but people who, could find other types of value from IBM. So I mentioned access earlier. Any times that we can get our influencer access to things that are behind the scenes or a first look at a new product that we're launching or upcoming signature moment, that oftentimes is of incredible value to them. Access to subject matter experts too. So oftentimes you'll find that an influencer wants to write a series about a particular topic, but just like we go to influencers, they need subject matter experts to be kind of the subject matter of what they're talking about. And so we can give them access into our own internal SMEs that they can interview and start to engage with. For some people, it's relationships. And by relationships, I don't just mean like everybody loves Amy Tennyson and wants to hang out with me. But, as you form relationships, those relationships can transform into other things. So by, working in kind of a fair exchange of value type of environment, you may be setting yourself up to eventually be asked to come be a speaker at a big event, which could certainly add to your notoriety. You could have a relationship where, maybe you want to eventually work for that company, or, even leverage that, corporate person's, as a reference if you're looking to work at a different company where they have that connection. So those are just a couple things. I think also, certainly, we've talked about just our employee advocacy tool and our ability to help, provide exposure to particular influencers who maybe don't necessarily have as big of a social presence. We've got one influencer who, she doesn't have a ton of people on Twitter, but she has a very active blog. And she talks about, anytime she writes a blog, that's really when the magic starts to happen, because she sends us her blog post and then we create kind of this personalized social tile or social meme for her that we put out on Twitter, and it's got great branding. We put that across all of our branded channels. We have our thousands of employees, help to promote it. And so here's someone who maybe normally got a couple of hundred views to her blog post, but now she's getting thousands just because of the exposure that we're able to provide her. And then the last thing I think is also just like causes. Sometimes people are just really passionate about particular things. And so they're willing to, join up just because, maybe you're doing something around social good, and people, are just such huge ambassadors of social good, or entrepreneurs, or even millennials. And so they want to naturally be part of that conversation. So, it again goes back to that kind of one-on-one, what that influencer is looking for. But I think, what's nice, at least as a marketer and a brand, is that it's not always, it's not always money, right? There's a lot of other things that you could put in place that will still be of a lot of value to them.
No, I love it. And I also think one of the ones that kind of came to came to life very recently, and a couple of things that I was working on was actually people's access to other influencers, and knowing who the influencers are that you are bringing in. Oftentimes, that can almost even excite them as much as it is to work with the brand, having the opportunity to share in a VIP experience with someone they've looked up to in their specific industry, even if it's very little to do with what the brand's doing. I think that's an interesting play and discovery as well, because then you kind of can get more value. So even because maybe someone's a bigger name and they might not be as great an influencer on that topic, they can also get you better influencers that are probably in that subject area.
Well,
so I love that.
On that note, one of the things we love, one of the communication channels we use is a private Facebook group, and people are often like, oh, why do you use Facebook? Facebook's where people want to hang out with their friends and family. And yes, we use it to share messages with them from an IBM influencer perspective, but the best part is, it's a network where they get to bond and continue to talking to all the great people they may have met at a face-to-face event. And so oftentimes, it's not this place where you go to talk to IBM, but it's this place where you go to talk to, 50 of your new closest friends that you met, whether, in person or in social media. And so it takes on a life of its own, where, you're right. Like, it's not just about my relationship with them, but it's about the whole ecosystem and the new friendships they're able to form.
Yeah, I love what you're saying, because I think at the end of the day, and often I think what a lot of people forget is, like, you're building a little community. It's like a subset of your much larger audience, and it's the coolest thing when you see them collaborating together and then going off and doing other projects. I think that's kind of the ultimate success and kind of builds on that organic growth that you're talking about.
Absolutely.
So the last question that we have scripted for today is, I think, something we all struggle with. It's maintaining mutually beneficial relationships, because, we all have so many contacts these days. But in terms of influencer marketing, I know you mentioned a couple of tools that you use, but how do you stay in touch with those important people to make sure that they're following through?
Yeah, you can imagine if you've got, even 25 or 50 influencers, just even remembering all of those conversations that you've had sometimes becomes tricky. I'd say that when we started off, we were heavily Excel driven. We've started to apply additional tools. So even things like, as we onboard influencers, we try to make sure that we have them all fill out a SurveyMonkey survey, just to be able to have kind of this like database of information about them, right? That we can go back and tab later. For us, we do things like we have a monthly book club where we promote different authors. And so in that survey, we can say, hey, do you have a book that's already out, or do you have a book that's coming up? So just very simple things like that, but also getting their address and their phone number and different things like that in case we need to book travel for them in the future, food preferences. So that's part of it. I'd also say that we're just starting to use some new tools too. We certainly still use Nimble for some influencer kind of management. Starting to take advantage of Tracker. One of the things I like about Tracker is that you can, BCC an email address, and then Tracker keeps track of all the communications that you've sent them, just so you have a record of that somewhere. So that's kind of how we're starting to scale out of Excel spreadsheets and into something that's a little bit more nimble. But, I would just say, again, you should never take on more than you're capable of managing. And I know that's really hard because, we want to show big numbers and big results. But ultimately, your program will only be as good as the relationships that you're able to build. And so when you start to have people in the program that you don't really know, those people are naturally not going to be as valuable to you. So you need to just really think through how you're staffing and resourcing everything that you're trying to do.
No, I love hearing that. That's that. I mean, I think that's kind of the true essence, and I think the scale part is definitely the hard part, right? And I think not only scale, but I'd be curious what your thoughts were. You know, you were working with Dell early on. I think Dell was definitely one of the early pioneers on really leveraging social media from an enterprise perspective, and then really doing it as well with influencer marketing. But like, we're gonna bring in some questions from the audience. So if you have a question, use /Q in the comments section, and it'll pop up. We'll make sure to bring your question in. As always, use Twitter as well. I'm curious, just from a standpoint of, you know, how has influencer marketing changed since you kind of got in the game? Because I think the change is probably the most exciting thing, but it's also the scariest for a lot of people. Because I think, you know, we have small businesses and different size businesses that watch the show, and they're like, wow, I just got on board and figured out how to use, you know, a tool or maybe understand what an influencer was. And then all of a sudden, follower count doesn't matter as much. It now matters on, you know, community and conversations, and you have to do all these things. So I'm curious, just from your experience, what have you seen as like kind of the evolution of influencer marketing?
Yeah, I think you know, one of the biggest things is that I think initially influencer marketing was largely just inviting social influencers or people with big social media accounts to events. And you would invite someone to an event, they would go, and then you really wouldn't talk to them again until maybe the next event came up. And so not to say that was ever the best way to do it, but, you know, today I think it's moved past that, where, you know, people really understand the importance of having kind of a long-term program, right? You can't just have an influencer marketing person who's only on point for each event that comes up, but you need someone year round who's focused on that. And the payoff is there. You know, certainly if you're working with that person year round, as opposed to just in a short period of time, the return that you're going to get from them is so much bigger, as well as the opportunities that you would never even know about that they're going to bring to you throughout that time period. You know, another thing too, I'd say, is just oftentimes I think it started off very basic, right? So maybe it wasn't you invite them to an event, but maybe you have them participate in a tweet chat, or, you know, like you were saying, a lot of companies just say, hey, you know, will you author this blog post for me? Or will you, you know, here's a blog post, will you kind of tweak it? And I think what you're starting to see is this much larger evolution where brands are kind of catching on about, you know, all the different ways that they can participate with influencers. And so, you know, as I talk to my team, it's often about kind of this multi-step approach, right? So, you know, when you're just starting off with someone, what are we doing to promote their content, right? Before we ever ask for anything from them, what are we doing just to highlight the great thought leadership content that they already have and put that out in the marketplace? You know, from there, it's, you know, an opportunity to start to engage them. So how do we start to bring them into, you know, a call or an event that we have where they can get exposure to some of our subject matter experts and content? You know, and kind of the hope with that, right, is always that, you know, it'll be valuable enough to them that they would want to do something, you know, whether, you know, live tweet it or write a blog post or do a video about it themselves. But we're kind of starting to create that opportunity for them. And then I think the third thing is where you move into co-created content, right? And so, you know, as a big brand, not everybody has a huge budget, but, you know, you might have in-house design resources or you know, out-of-house agency resources you can leverage. And that's a chance for you to create something with an influencer that's of huge value to them, because they may not have those design resources themselves. But now all of a sudden, you're creating this really nice polished piece for them. So, you know, I think all of that has just continued to evolve. The types of assets we create with people continues to evolve. You know, we're exploring things like blabs, you know, how do we use that for influencers? So it's just this whole piece, again, of figuring out what's really a value to them, what's a value to you, and then not feeling like you have to do it all, but kind of building up to a really robust program.
So I saw a question here from Ian Gertler, and I think you know Ian. Ian is a previous IBMer, and actually when I was doing some of my work, he was still at IBM, and he had a good question. He said, commitment and ongoing interaction definitely are the foundations for influencer marketing, with people being the key. Do too many brands today focus more on the tech versus the people today? So that's kind of his question to you, Amy.
Yeah, I think, you know, you don't have to jump on like every single new social media craze. I think it's just about finding what works for you and that influencer. And so I guess a good example would be for us, we every month do a monthly tweet chat, and we've found that works really well. We also, as part of the book club, are doing Google Plus Hangouts. But like a blab is not part of what we do as a reoccurring type of event. But what we often find is that, we leave it up to the influencer. So if the influencer, has a new platform that they really care about, they could bring us an idea and say, hey, I have this idea for a 6-part series. Would you be interested in participating? And then that's kind of our opportunity to join in, but it's not something that we have to own the burden of creating and running on our own. So, it is just a balance. For us, we like to try new things out, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's going to make it into the reoccurring list of activities that we put on.
Rachel, did you see other questions coming through on your side?
No, I know I starred some, but the stream is moving so fast.
I know. Kristen, if you want to go ahead and open that seat, we'll open the seat up if someone wants to jump on video, ask question. Amy, I will attest. I'm relaunching my website and rebuilding out my website, and going through lots of my collateral and lots of the stuff I have saved. And knowing that you were going to be a guest, I went through last night and I was going through my stuff. In the last 18 months, I have 32 social share graphics that IBM has created either for my content or the content I've helped create. And that's 32 pieces of content, which is pretty, impressive from the standpoint of, like you said, I do a lot of my own design work, but allowing IBM to do the graphic and design work and help amplification. I thought, I was like, wow, after I went back and counted, I said, that's a lot of content. So kudos to that. But Chip, welcome to Blab. Do you have a question for us or comment? Oh, I think our internet froze there.
Oh, bummer.
I think it was working perfectly fine for a second. Chip, try to jump back in if you can. But no, yeah, let's see what other questions. We have a bunch of questions coming through on this side. Here, let's see. This is one that I actually think is interesting. So last week we talked with Brian Kramer, and we actually were discussing the idea that there even needs to be a training to be what is an influencer, how do you become an influencer, and how do you become an actually good influencer that continues to get asked back to be an influencer in the future? Because it's one thing to be asked to be an influencer. It's another thing, I think, to continually to be asked, because I think that's the perfect match of both people providing value and adding value, but also kind of growing an evolution with the tool and the technology. I think a lot of times I've heard it from different influencers saying, well, I used to work with that brand. And then I ask them, well, why did you stop working with it? And they have a whole bunch of excuses, but the underlying principle is they just stopped working in that industry or stopped focusing their attention on that technology. So I think that's interesting. Chip, I think you're back for us. Can you hear me? Oh. Yep. All right, Chip, do you have a question or comment for us?
Sure. Hey, thanks, Brian and Amy and Rachel. I really appreciate. Just wanted to jump on. I asked the question, but I think it flowed past really quick. Just talking about influencer marketing. I'm wondering if you guys have heard about a product called Influitive and your thoughts about it. It sounds really interesting. I've heard some good feedback from current customers, and it seems pretty exciting. I'm just wondering a little bit also about, the whole question from the FTC about, if you're giving something back, if you're earning something from, endorsing something, that you could get into trouble. So I'm wondering about just what kind of experience you've seen with it or heard about it, and kind of what you're hearing about it.
So I know Rachel has used Influitive. Amy, do you guys use Influitive over there at IBM?
Sorry, can you just repeat that? It's super quiet. I couldn't hear.
Yeah, sure. Influitive is the name of the tool. It's actually the tool that's the underlying tool for Brian Kramer's Shareology.
So it's an advocacy.
So yeah, Rachel, you want to address the question and just thoughts on that from a influencer sharing amplification and tool?
Yeah, I guess to invest in a tool like Influitive, it really depends on your ultimate goal. I know there are a lot of companies that use it very successfully, less for influencer marketing, more for ambassador programs. So I know like Hootsuite has a fantastic program that they primarily use Influitive for. Brian Kramer's Shareology website is powered by Influitive, makes it very easy to amplify community content. And he does take submissions from the community that you can put into the system. So from an amplification, and we do like to gamify things and, you know, get points. And it really depends what you want to do. Hootsuite, you build up points, and then you can buy stuff from their store. So it really comes down to goals. If you just purely want to amplify content, there are benefits. But I think when you're working with influencers, you want it to be mutually beneficial and not just have them constantly doing stuff for you. You want to make sure that it's a 50-50 give and take. And something like Influitive is definitely a one-sided thing in my experience. Did we lose him?
No, yeah, I think we did. But yeah, Chip, thanks so much for the question. And it's actually a great question. Also, I will tell you something that I've kind of learned as of recently, that I think before or early on, a couple of years ago, it was kind of looked at as when someone would say they're being an influencer, people were kind of hiding it or not being willing to expose that it was an influencer relationship or agreement. I think that tide is actually switching. And I think now people are actually willing to not only advertise it, but it's actually a little bit of a badge of honor if someone's working with a brand that is correctly aligned with them. So I hope that's partially for me why I think the FCC, the whole idea of like full disclosure, for a lot of people that I work with, it's not even a question. Like I'll put sponsored by or trip courtesy of without even a question, because it's saying, hey, I'm working with brands that I align with. I think part of the problem came back in the day when you were willing to take brands and work influencer work with brands that maybe you weren't aligned with or didn't want to brag that you were doing work with, and you probably did try to be a little bit more disclosed, hidden on that. But it's a great question, because I think using things like dynamic signal. So, from an employee advocacy perspective, if your influencers are using dynamic signal, the content they are sharing, do they have to disclose that they're using a tool that was provided to them via IBM? I don't know really how that one works. Do you know, Amy, on that side?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's tricky and we haven't fully figured it out. At the end of the day, what I like about any, content sharing tool is that ultimately what you share is up to you. There's no forced requirement, at least hopefully not, of, having to share X amount of content from it. So really, it almost becomes the same as like a Google Reader used to be back in the day, or even other like content curation tools you use on your own. You use it as a content destination, as a hub to find interesting things to share. But I think you as an individual are ultimately responsible for making sure that anything you share to your network is of value to your network, because that's the kind of reason why you have the followers that you do, right? If you start just putting out any type of content, you're likely not to keep those followers. So the onus is a little bit on the individual, regardless of where they're going to get that content.
No, I love that. And that's the truth. I love the idea that you're not forced to share or have to share anything, right? It's all up to them to share, and even with the gamification, like Rachel was talking about, I think that, that helps incentivize some to share, but it's still them clicking a button. It's not you tapping into a group and auto posting your account a certain amount of times a day to be quote unquote considered an influencer.
Yeah. Well, and what drives me the most nuts is just with any of those tools where, sometimes people can default like the full social text. And to me, like that's like the number one no. Like just if you're going to share any type of content, like you should be crafting that tweet yourself. You shouldn't just be using the default text that someone gives you. And I just hope that, any influencer that I have at least, certainly lives by a bigger standard than that. So it hasn't been something that we've so much had to worry about, but I think just, I'd warn any brand against, pre-populating the full text versus giving them kind of a good way to access the links or the hashtags and the handles, but then, craft the tweet on their own.
Yes, I've actually had the best success where you give them all of the information, but you don't actually script anything. And then they create the message that's going to best suit their specific audience. So I think it also looks really ugly when there's 100 of the same verbatim tweets being pushed out on social. So.
Hey, Jody.
Hi. How are you?
Jody, good. We're doing real good. So I saw you in the comments and adding some insights. I would love to hear your take on kind of this conversation. I don't know, Jody, do you know Amy? Amy, Jody, if you don't know each other.
Hi. Nice to see you guys. I was thinking, what can I add to the conversation about brand alignment and influencer marketing? My niche is financial aid. And so I started a company 10 years ago where I strictly help families with financial aid. And now I am the brand ambassador for Discover. And so we do a lot of brand alignment. And so I think what I would add to the conversation is that making sure that when you're with a brand that they're meeting your needs and aligning with what you can do to sort of lay your head down on the pillow at night. So the tweets that you're talking about are comfortable, they're in your niche, and that you're meeting each other's needs and always talking. I know with us, we have a weekly meeting where we talk about what's going to happen.
No, I love that. And Amy, I think that Facebook group that, that is run from an influencer perspective, especially from me on the other side. So me as an influencer, I love it. I love it for engagement. I love it for conversations that go on. It's not something that is, I would say, a big shout out to Susie on the Pure Matter side, who does a great job of not spamming that group and not filling it full of stuff that makes me turn off the notifications. It's one of the few Facebook groups that I've had notifications turned on since day one and have never been forced to take it off, which I think is the great job of a community manager in that space. But I also think, one of the questions we heard a lot last week, and Jody, it kind of plays into your side, is you also, from an influencer, what does success look like from, if you have influencers and it does need to be aligned with your brand and the story, what does success look like? What is your boss, Amy, I would love to hear, from your perspective, what are you going back and reporting on that, hey, this influencer was successful because they did, like, what does that look like? So maybe the people that are out there now that want to be an influencer or maybe have been and haven't been successful at it, maybe they'll be able to kind of take some tips out of this conversation.
Go ahead, Amy.
I think, it's a variety of different things. When we're at big events, we look at overall social amplification while we were on site and kind of what was that contribution from the influencers versus all of the other attendees versus IBM employees. I mean, our influencers have been phenomenal, right? Oftentimes, they're some of the highest percentages of social amplification that we get. But it's so much more than that too, because after the event, like, we're always leveraging those face-to-face opportunities to create this, 3 to 6 month content calendar with them. And then each of those pieces of content kind of have their own levels of success and measurements. So even things like when we work with an influencer on a guest blog post, we're going to go back and we're going to look at, how many reactions did that particular blog post get? And some influencers just naturally get, so much more than other people because they're out there actively promoting that blog themselves too, and feel really proud of it. So it could be those things. Certainly also, we absolutely look at third-party blog posts, both thought leadership ones as well as ones that mention IBM, which is great. We're not asking people to say anything in particular, but when they take it upon themselves to write about us, like, that's phenomenal for us. We want to make sure that we're really, highlighting those particular blogs with our executive team.
So I have a question for Amy. So Amy, are you breaking it down so that the influencer sees where it is, their numbers and everything like that, and giving them the direct feedback?
Yeah, we don't, we're not like ranking the influencers against each other in any way. I think what we do share, on smaller one-on-one things, we will certainly say, hey, this was great. Just want to let you know, like, your blog got X amount of views and X amount of reactions. So they're kind of getting a sense of how they're performing too. Also, as we are starting to share influencer content in some of our employee advocacy tools, we can give them, the numbers of times that our employees shared it, how many clicks that drove back for them. So I wouldn't say we do it all the time, but, as we're asked for that information or as it's something a little bit above the norm, we certainly want to make sure that we're getting that back out to them.
And I'm sure that they would like to do better and better, and improve in where they can, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, for sure. And one thing that we did that was actually really neat, Brian was actually there, but it was one of the first big influencer programs we launched last November. It was one of the most successful product launches we'd ever had, pulling in influencers. And so we actually wrote up kind of a short description for those influencers to put on their LinkedIn profile if they wanted to as a project. We also won an award for that particular campaign from the Stevie Awards. And so we shared that social tile out to the influencers so that, especially things where there's big milestones that we're meeting, like they also get to kind of take credit for some of that recognition.
Well, I would say just as a bystander that I kind of saw that online, and I definitely was looking around, and I definitely saw my circle there and was helping them promote. So you guys had to have done a good job in that sense, because it felt cohesive with things that I do every day, which didn't necessarily have to do with my niche, but felt cohesive to support my friends.
Yeah.
Good thing.
No, yeah, I agree. And I think that's kind of the beauty of, I think, the great influencer program that kind of aligns to where it allows each influencer to tell their story in a way that's relative for their audience, instead of just a way of saying, hey, we all went to a tech event and we're all spewing tech crap. It's like, hey, I'm a customer service person. I went to a tech event and there's the customer service, speaking events or things that exposed me, or this is what I learned about this that is my niche. And I think that's kind of, unfortunately, some other ones, that's kind of my point of the whole idea of forced or kind of programmatic, is then everybody does come out like a robot and everybody does come out, spewing the same thing, because it is, so scripted and so kind of dialed in for that perspective. So there's a couple other questions that kind of come through.
Bye.
All right. Thank you so much, Jetty. Jetty, I'll Facebook message you tomorrow.
Bye. Bye.
Thank you. One of the things that I actually thought was pretty interesting, when you're talking offline events, and offline events being, we talk about connecting offline events with online events. Is it more the team that is putting on the event, as in the department inside of IBM, that's in charge to work with the influencer, or is it the event team, or how does that work? Kind of I'd say the responsibility between events, if it's an e-commerce team, or how do you guys kind of manage that? Because I'm sure the success metrics are also different for both.
Yeah. So for online events, ultimately myself, and then there's another woman I work with named Camille, we're going to be responsible for the influencer engagement in those activities. And that's really virtual and in-person events. But we also have a great group of, community managers and social strategists who are helping to technically execute those events. They will work with their content teams to ensure that if we're doing a book club hangout or a tweet chat, that those particular questions align to kind of our business topic areas, and that we've got the messaging on point. So it's definitely an army of people. It's not just, I wouldn't say it's just, like myself doing anything, but it's, everybody owning kind of their own piece of it. And then when it comes to in-person events, I'm sure, just like at a lot of other companies, you've got kind of a traditional events team. They're the ones putting on that overarching event. And so we try to work closely with them to make sure that the influencers get a VIP experience while they're there. So that could be things like special seating at general session, having a blogger lounge exclusive to them with hardwire internet, because, event internet's always a little shaky. And then, of course, we have recently taken upon ourselves to also create these additional influencer-only events as part of the larger overarching conference. So we look at things like, how can we take what's already happening at the event, but create an environment where the influencer all of a sudden is center stage. It's not just them kind of passively listening, but it's a chance for them to really share their expertise with each other. And typically when we do it, we try to make sure it's in a really cool location too, so it can just really inspire that creativity. So Brian's kind of laughing, but we've done this everywhere from the San Diego Zoo. We've done it from, their Rain Man suite at Caesar's Palace, and we did it at this really cool kind of loft space when we did an event in New York. But it's just about making them feel really special. Like, we're not just seating them down in kind of this dark, ballroom or conference room, but like, we really want to spark these genuine conversations where they're sharing their expertise with each other. And going back to what you said earlier, like building relationships, right? Like that the more that we can get them sitting and talking one-on-one with each other is the more that they're going to benefit from those other perspectives, but go home with a whole sense of community from the event.
No, I love it. And I talk about, my relationship with IBM, and I use IBM a lot on Social Business Hours. So our viewers are very familiar with me talking about, why and who I worked with at IBM. And I always say, when I think of IBM, I don't think of Big Blue or the logo. I think of, Amy and I talk about your team. And so now people are able to see the Amy that I've been talking about for a while as the one that does a great job on that. So I love that answer. JS, how's it going, my friend?
Good, good. How are you, Brian? Hi, Rachel.
I'm doing
Hi, Amy.
Hi.
Wonderful. What's to you?
I'm sorry I got in here a little late, but I have been catching quite a bit of this.
We'll do Dr. Pay later, but don't worry about it.
I'm very excited about what IBM is doing these days. And if people aren't aware, this is a company that is managing to stay relevant, beyond relevant, since I believe 1914. Is that correct? Something like that. So can you hear
I don't
me?
know the exact year.
Yeah,
we can hear you. Yep, you're loud. Go ahead.
I had a question. I think a lot of people who are watching this or will watch this are either entrepreneurs or small business people, and they may be thinking that IBM is beyond their grasp, that you don't have affordable tools or the programs are designed for large companies. So are there actually affordable programs? Are there things that are designed to help small businesses and entrepreneurs?
Rachel, do you want to jump in on that one? I know Rachel probably has some tools
Yeah,
and tips.
I think people would be surprised to know that the tools that I know that I use for all of my influence programs are incredibly affordable, if not free. Because Google Docs is my go-to, Google Sheets, and tools like Nimble, Littlebird, Clear, all incredibly affordable tools that we're talking, $10 a month affordable. So you can use Sysomos and a lot more sophisticated tools for listening, but it's not essential. I think if you are IBM, you can leverage these fantastic tools, but if you're just starting out, a lot of my essentials are really affordable. So don't be tripped up on tools.
Okay. I kind of was speaking mostly about what IBM would provide.
Provide for the influencers?
IBM has a lot of tools that are out there for businesses to be able to interact with influencers or work in social media and so on and so forth. I was just curious if there are tools out there that work well for the small business that's looking to interact with influencers or needs help in social media and so on and so forth. Are they scaled mostly for the for enterprise?
Yeah, I would just say we have a lot of different tools. I don't know that they all specialize just in influencer marketing. I think there are things like social media analytics tools, Watson Analytics, which has kind of a direct pipeline into a lot of great Twitter data. We also have a recent Facebook relationship. So you can certainly use IBM tools that are affordable even to small businesses to be able to help identify influencers. But I don't think that we necessarily have software that's to the same types of things that someone like a Nimble or Tracker is trying to accomplish when it comes to influencer management.
Or not just influencers, but in marketing and social media support and so forth.
Oh yeah. I mean, for sure. A ton of great stuff, especially with everything on our new IBM Marketing Cloud solutions, the things I mentioned with social media analytics, things around customer analytics and journey analytics. There's a ton of great stuff. Just for sake of time, I direct you to ibm.com/commerce, but I think the analytics piece is such that the starting ground for everything else that you want to do. So if you can get the right tools and solutions in place to help from an analytics perspective, there's a lot that you can do, as a small business or medium business to start to implement really strong customer and influencer engagement programs.
Terrific. Thanks. And thank you, Rachel and Brian. I'm going to jump off then.
Thanks, JS. Appreciate it. All right, we have it's pretty much 5 o'clock now, so that's our 1 hour of social business hour. I love the conversation, so much great back and forth and dialogue in the comments section. We've been using Blab now almost 3 months or 2.5 months as a platform for this conversation. And we're loving kind of the both Twitter and Blab discussion that's going on. But Amy, thank you so much for spending the time, taking the time out on your Monday. I know you are going to be a new mother coming up in the next couple of months. So congratulations on the upcoming baby. I know that is craziness and fun all at once. So,
yes.
And I believe I get to see you in October. So I'm excited. Rachel, anything else that you wanted to add before we jump off?
No, just thanks again, Amy. This has been awesome. We strive to keep these conversations really actionable, and I think you provided some really useful information for everybody. So big thank you for your time.
Awesome. No, I'm excited to see the Twitter and Blab feed myself, just because it was hard to keep up. But I appreciate that there's a lot of different ways people are running these programs, and we're just doing it one way. But we're continuing to learn too.
Thanks, Amy. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in.
Bye.
We'll be back again next week, same time, same channel, SBiz Hour on the Twitters.